Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome into our latest TDR Cannabis in 5, presented by Dutchie. As usual, I'm your host, Shad Dales. Today I'm going to break down a Supreme Court case that could change the way cannabis consumers are treated under federal law. Why? Well, the Department of Justice under President Trump, they just filed a brief that shows major disagreement inside the government about whether people who use marijuana should lose their Second Amendment right to own a gun. So clearly this is a big story, not just because of the legal questions, but because it ties directly into how cannabis is viewed under federal law and what rescheduling or reform could mean here in the future. So with that, let's get into our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. So let's first look at what is at stake. Right now, under federal law, anyone who is an unlawful user of a controlled substance is banned from buying or possession a firearm. Many of you know this. That includes people who consume cannabis, even if it's legal in their state. That doesn't make sense. This rule has been on the books for decades, but as cannabis laws change at the state level, it's created a collision between state legalization and federal prohibition. Millions of Americans can legally use, as we know, cannabis where they live, but under federal law, those same people can't legally own a gun. This is 2025. Is this really still in law? Well, that's the core issue right now at the Supreme Court. So we look further, we look at a case, and it involves a man named Patrick Daniels from Mississippi. He admitted to being a regular cannabis user. Law enforcement found him with marijuana and 2 guns. So under federal law, that made him a felon in possession of a firearm. He was then convicted and sentenced. It's crazy. But let's also point out, Daniels did fight back, and good for him. He argued that federal ban violates his Second Amendment rights, especially in light of recent Supreme Court rulings that expanded gun protections. One appeals court actually agreed with him, saying the federal law was unconstitutional as applied to his case. Now, we look back, the Biden administration, they started defending the law. Now, under Trump, the DOJ has continued to defend it, but with a twist. So let's get into that. In the latest Supreme Court filing, the Trump DOJ acknowledged there is significant disagreement on this issue. And let's face it, that's unusual. Normally, the DOJ speaks with one voice. So what they're saying is this: some parts of the government still believe marijuana users are dangerous if they own guns, but others believe the rule is outdated, especially given that cannabis is legal in so many states. So that open admission shows the tracks in federal cannabis policy. Even inside the Trump administration, there isn't a clear consensus right now. So as we talk about this, why does this matter? Because let's face it, the gun ban is built on the idea that cannabis is an illegal drug with no accepted medical use. That's the same reasoning behind cannabis being a Schedule I drug. So if cannabis is indeed rescheduled or descheduled, it could directly affect how these gun laws are applied. So you see some moving parts again here, everyone? So in other words, fixing cannabis scheduling could automatically fix the cannabis gun conflict. And really, that's why so many eyes right now are on this case. It's not just about guns, it's about whether federal law will keep treating cannabis consumers like second-class citizens. And they have a point. So pay attention to this. And the reason why I say pay attention to this, because here's where it gets even more interesting. Polls show that most Americans, including gun owners, don't believe cannabis use should automatically strip away their Second Amendment rights. Thanks, Captain Obvious. So think about it. Alcohol users can own guns, prescription drug users can own guns, yet cannabis users, even medical patients, are singled out. That feels inconsistent, and the public seems to agree. Man, I love this country here in America, but man, some of these laws are so outdated. So this really does make the Supreme Court case even more high stakes because, let's face it, it's not just a legal battle, it's also a cultural one, and a big one. And speaking of a big one and consistency, in the cannabis industry, consistency is everything. That's why today's show is presented to you by Dutchie. Dutchie is the technology platform trusted by dispensaries all across this great country of the USA. From point of sale to online ordering and payments, Dutchie helps cannabis businesses stay compliant, efficient, and customer friendly. If you want to learn more, visit business.dutchie.com. All right, so now that we've come this far, let's now zoom out just a little bit. Let's face it, Trump's DOJ, they're walking a fine line here. On one hand, they want to maintain a law and order stance, something Trump, as we know, has campaigned on heavily. Then on the other hand, there's pressure from both cannabis advocates and gun rights advocates to change this outdated rule, and the conversation is getting louder. So this creates a coalition. Pro-cannabis groups and pro-gun groups don't usually line up together, but in this case, they're on the same side arguing that cannabis cannabis use shouldn't be stripped away from their constitutional rights, and they have a point. So that's politically in some ways tricky, and it's why the DOJ is hedging in its filing, admitting there's no full agreement internally right now. And it's also important to remember the Supreme Court's recent track record. Back in 2022, the court ruled in Bruin versus New York that gun laws have to be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. So that ruling has already been used to challenge modern gun restrictions. But that's 3 years ago. Things have changed in that time. In Daniels' case, lower courts pointed out that there's no historical tradition of banning people from owning guns just because they used a substance like cannabis. That's why Daniels won at the appeals court level. Big win. So the big question now is, will the Supreme Court extend that logic and strike down the marijuana gun ban altogether? Well, we're going to find out. So as I bring this all together, what does it mean for you? For the cannabis industry, this case could have huge ripple effects. Let's face it, if the Supreme Court says the ban is unconstitutional, then cannabis users across the country would regain the right to own firearms. And that would also expose how inconsistent federal cannabis law really is. It could put even more pressure on Congress and the DEA to finally resolve cannabis scheduling. Hello? So for businesses, it would be another step towards normalizing cannabis users as regular citizens, not criminals. It's all we want right now and what we've been saying for a number of years. So looking ahead, what happens next? The Supreme Court will hear arguments and they will issue a ruling later this term. That means we could have a decision sometime here in 2025. Between now and then, expect more filings, more advocacy, and more headlines. And whichever way the court rules, it will shape both cannabis and gun policy for years to come. Big topic here. A lot of implications, and it all circles back to what? Cannabis rescheduling. So here's the bottom line. The Trump DOJ just admitted in a Supreme Court filing that there is a major disagreement inside the government about whether cannabis consumers should lose their gun rights. So that single admission shows just how much cannabis policy is in flux. The old rules don't fit with the reality, and whether that's through rescheduling, Congress, or the Supreme Court, let's face it, change is coming. That's a good thing. That's it for our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and smash on that bell for all notifications and give us your feedback. Love to know what you think. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in our next video. This is the TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. I'm your host, Shad Dales. So long, everyone.